So it's Sunday evening. Here we are. Sundays are always a pretty big day in our house because it's obviously a day we go to church. But in addition, my wife teaches a couple of classes at church, and I help. I'm one of several men who teach the Sunday morning Sunday school class for adults, and today was a pretty strong class. I was teaching on Josiah. I'm not really particularly here to talk about that though. I was thinking about the impact, the effect that the last 10 years of very toxic messaging has had on America's youth, America's grown-ups. And I'm like a early millennial. So, we're we have kind of that jaded Gen X thing going on, but also we're prone to strident views. Like, if you go back 15 years, before it became like it was really around actually the time when that whole thing kicked off. I was extremely libertarian, and I still am, in the sense that whatever you want to do, as long as it doesn't hurt another person, you should have the right to do. The problem is libertarianism, which I wholeheartedly embrace. Like 2016, I didn't vote for Hillary or Trump. I voted for Gary Johnson because I couldn't, with good conscience, vote for either one, Trump or Hillary Clinton. When I found out that Donald Trump was the Republican nominee, it just reinforced my absolute divorce from the Republican Party. If we go back 25 years, like when I was 16, which was 26 years ago, I was watching Fox News constantly, and it was bad then, but not like it is now, not like it was 10 years ago. And I was wholeheartedly into the, we're going to be the next great young conservative generation, which is weird because that's not exactly how I was raised. And thankfully it happened before social media, because I probably would have been absolutely indoctrinated. And anyway, 2016, I was like, this is nuts. I'm not voting for Bill Clinton's wife, and I'm not voting for Donald Trump. Like, I'm old enough to remember Donald Trump growing up, not only from his reality show, The Apprentice. Not only from that, from my childhood, I saw Home Alone 2 in theaters, so I remember being like, oh, it's that guy with the yellow hair and the suit and the weird smile. And so I was creeped all the way out in 2015 when he became the alleged Republican nominee, and also lived through the 90s with the Clintons and knew that Hillary Clinton, while brilliant, she's a genius. She's also pretty nefarious in her own right. And granted, she was horrendously embarrassed by her husband in real time in national media. She already wasn't liked, and that's pretty rough. But either way, that's who I was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I held views that in their best case were altruistic, and in their worst case were harmful. So nowadays, I'm thinking about the future for other people. And specifically, these videos are geared towards men, young men, old men, if they want to watch a younger guy talk, I mean, I'm 42, so if you're older than me and watching me on YouTube, cool. I don't want to see young men make a worse future for themselves and for the women of America or anywhere in the world than I had. And, you know, I grew up in a pretty, I guess you'd call it kind of a liberated time. Growing up as a adolescent and a teenager in the 90s was wild because while there was a lot of pushback and a lot of weirdness with the whole purity culture, non-denom Christian world, the secular world, if you want to call it that, it was just pop culture, man. I mean, we were all out here watching MTV and VH1, and A&E, and like all these, like there was so much cultural possibility at the time that feels less likely and less possible for young people nowadays. We were just out there doing life and enjoying things, and yeah, there was a lot of kids these days kind of talk from older people, but really it was both tame and dangerous at the same time. There's a song, I think it came out in 97, maybe later, 98, by the group The Offspring, called The Kids Aren't All Right. And that song's accurate. Like, we had a lot of problems, a lot of issues that have created the modern therapy industry in the way that we know it. But also, for me personally, at least, I don't know about anybody else, but for me personally, I was able to work through things over time that I feel like if I was stuck in the environment that people are in now, and that even I exist in now, if I still had those particular issues, problems, hang-ups, I would not be able to work through them, because I would be looking to TikTok and I would be looking to some guy talking into a camera like me for answers. And so when I consider where I am and where the world is, I think if I'm going to put something out there, it needs to be a case of what can we do to be better? How can I be better? How can I help make the world around me better? And these videos might not do that. That's honesty. I might not be able to accomplish what I am hoping for. But there's a whole generation and more of men who've only heard the worst about everything. They've been told everything bad that can possibly be bad, and they think they know how the world is, when what they actually know is how to be exploited by people who want their money. I talked about this some in my last video, that if you're watching it, and even though I don't have a YouTube thing and I don't make money off of this, will lump me in too. If you're watching it, somebody's making money. In the case of me, if you're watching me, YouTube and Google and Alphabet are making money. And for the average everyday person, that's not actually a problem, because they're just doing a job somewhere of whatever kind, whether it's someone who gets the coffee for an office that makes sure that terrible things do not get onto the internet. All of these things are tiny little bricks. They're Legos, essentially, in a much broader system, that there's not like one guy at the top going, do this and do that. It's a system. Systems are amazingly useful, but they also create an environment in which there's no individual accountability. There's not even the requirement that you think about what you're doing. This is how national organizations, national agencies exploit people without it ever being questioned. I mean, this is a little bit dramatic, but that's kind of how Nazism was able to do the terrible things it did, was that so many people were just little cogs in the machine. That's kind of a 20th century saying, but you might say tiny little Legos in the 2,000 piece set. You know, individually those Legos make nothing, but you put them all together and you have a Star Destroyer or a Death Star, or, you know, whatever. So that is the ecosystem right now for me and for a lot of younger people who've never known anything else. This is kind of some of the themes in some of the later Star Wars stuff, really. I mean, I got a little Star Wars heavy with my Legos analogy, but that's kind of what's been explored lately in Star Wars, is these individual, not the hero. It's not the hero's tale anymore. It's not Joseph Campbell. It's all these individual people who make up the empire, and they're just going day to day and doing a job. And the reason that's dangerous for us as a culture is not because those people don't deserve a right to go to a job and work and earn a living and do the things they want to do. It's the overall effect that is put into the world. And for my part, the effect I'm most concerned about at the moment, and I think it helped Trump, especially in 2024, young men leaned for Trump hard. Again, I am a conservative Christian, and that idea makes me pretty ill to my stomach. It, 20 years ago, if you'd said the things you believe are going to lead to Donald Trump, a philandering, womanizing, abusive, convicted in a civil court of rape man, to being the president of the United States, I would have laughed or vomited, hopefully both at the same time, which would, it's a baffling idea, but it has been shown scientifically that fathers of daughters end up becoming more progressive over time. That's certainly true for me. I think it's absolutely true. I can't look at my daughter without thinking anyone who would want to hurt her should be prohibited by law from doing things that would hurt her. And there are a lot of laws that already do that. What there are not, and what is a bigger question, is are there societal pressures and checks and balances and carrots and sticks in place to prevent it from happening outside of legal consequences. A few years ago, I don't even remember if my daughter was born. She probably was, but she would have been very small. There was a young man who, I think he was, this is not the Duke Rugby story, but there's a young man who tried to hook up with a girl at a party, and she said no, and she got really drunk and somehow ended up behind a dumpster, and this young man followed her, and he did the worst imaginable thing and violated her, and then he was arrested for it. The woman reported it and he was arrested, and he was convicted. He was convicted of violating a woman without her consent, much less her ability to give consent. And the judge chose, in his opinion and in his sentencing, he verbalized that this young man should not suffer for his lifetime for a few minutes of indiscretion or pleasure or whatever the verbiage was. It doesn't matter. It's horrendous. The worst imaginable thing I could imagine for any person, woman, male, whoever, but especially being a father of a daughter, a husband of a wife, a man who has many women in my life, in my family, friends, people I go to church with, that if this happened to them and a judge said, the guy who did it shouldn't suffer for a lifetime because of a few minutes of having fun. I think that's closer to what the judge said. A few minutes of fun. 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 The word in my brain doesn't start with an F, it starts with an R, and this judge used the word fun. Men, this cannot stand, this absolute injustice, horrific exploitation, disregard for your fellow humans. It cannot stand. It cannot be the world in which my daughter has to navigate. Now, fair enough, there's always going to be bad people and renegades and people who do the wrong thing. But I have a picture of my daughter from when she was about 2 years old. I was watching the University of Georgia Bulldogs, and she was running around, and she ran up, and I said, "Go Dogs." That's the thing we say. And she looked at me and she made what we called, when she was a small child, we called it pirate face, where she'd go, "Arr!" And I think it was probably already a manifestation of her mild autism. It also manifests in her everyday smile. If you ask her to smile for a picture, she doesn't want to smile, but and I have this picture of her just, and she's wearing her little red Georgia Bulldogs t-shirt that I got her when she was a baby. And I think, men, you have a choice. You can victimize women, or we need to start raising our daughters, which I think is probably the better answer. It's probably the only way. Raising them to be bulldogs. I mean, you can see on this shirt, that face right there, that's someone who's not going to back down, someone who's not going to let you walk on them or stop them from fighting you. If you are unwilling to change yourself and to be better and to give respect to women that they are innately born deserving, just like you are, then we'll teach them. Don't you dare let someone violate you. And there's a fine line there, because there's an ancient purity culture standard that is not what we're talking about. And that standard was that to even let a man, that it was far better to die than to let a man violate you. And what that led to was that any woman who didn't die in preventing a man from violating them would be killed, because she had failed her, a standard of honor had not been upheld. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about genuine fight back. If you're not willing to allow a woman to give consent, if you're not willing to allow a woman to say no when you say, hey, can we go out sometimes? If she says no, that's it. Anything you've ever heard about no means yes. Anything you've ever heard about I'm not going to take no for an answer, you're wrong. And I grew up hearing those things in places, especially in media. And if I didn't accept it, I was wrong. I'm willing to look into a camera that's going to put this up on the internet and say I was wrong for that. When I met my wife, we did not start dating immediately. She was dating somebody else. And when I met my wife, I didn't clock her as hot. I was having what I thought at the time, an intellectual discussion with a man, actually a debate, an argument at a coffee shop in Savannah on Liberty Street. It was called Gallery Espresso. It still is, but it's around the corner on Chippewa Square, I think. That's the Forrest Gump Square. But it was down in this basement level place, and they had a lot of sidewalk tables, and young people would gather and sit out there all night talking until they closed. And so I was having this argument with a man much older than me about a subject that I don't even agree with my own opinion from back then. But what I noticed about my wife was she was eavesdropping. And so even though I recognized her as an attractive woman to me, I didn't hit on her as such. What I said was, what do you think about this? Because she was obviously listening, and that told me she had an opinion. And I can't imagine a better way to meet somebody than asking what they think about something you're talking about and having a discourse about. That was 23 years ago. And she's in the other room right now doing her Italian lesson, because at some point we're going to Rome. We were going to go the beginning of this year or last year, either way. And we called it off because of the political climate, the concerns we had. We didn't get married for 3.5 years, roughly, from the time we met. We dated. I joined the Air National Guard. There was about a year where she lived back home. She had gotten her own apartment. She lived 2 blocks from the house. She probably could have carried on her own, all by herself, forever. But once I got off active duty, I was like, I just gotta go. And I got in my car one morning, 2 a.m., and headed for her hometown near Atlanta. And, it hasn't been 100% every time, all the time. We got married in 2007, October 6, 2007. And then 6 months later, I was deployed overseas. So I missed our first wedding anniversary. Thankfully, we were in a very stable place all around where she was able to, put up with that, and where I was able to endure it, and then I missed our second wedding anniversary somewhere with the Air Force. It wasn't that far away, but I wasn't home, so I wasn't even home for my first 2 anniversaries. And I don't know why I'm saying all this except to say that there is a lot more to life. If you're worried about, let's say it's just baseline. You're worried you're never going to be intimate with a woman, or you're never going to have a close physical relationship, and the companionship that we all want. I think even if it's not man and woman, woman and woman, man and man, whatever it might be, if you're worried about having that, when I met my wife, I had stopped worrying about that. I had been worried about that, and I earlier in the year had come out of a relationship where I didn't want it to end, and I could barely accept that it had ended, and it wasn't my choice. And I think what happened was eventually I came to understand and accept that me not having a choice in that it wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't my choice to make, because it's two people at least, hopefully just two. I am a monogamous person. It wasn't my choice to make, and once I did that, I was like, and I'm free. I can I don't have to be bound to this desire to find companionship right now. And then 6 months later, out of nothing and nowhere, I met the woman that would be my wife. And don't let other people define what you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to be it and when you're supposed to be it. That's not up to them. There's not a fixed timeline. And until it happens for you, you just gotta hang loose, man. I mean, when I was growing up, surf culture was kind of thing, and everybody throw out the old thing. That's kind of flippant, but that's what you gotta do, man. Just hang loose. And what you cannot do under any circumstances, believe you're entitled to anything. One of the most interesting things my wife ever told me was that if she had never found someone that she was willing to be married to, she was totally fine with that. That's fascinating. And it's something we should all consider. We should all keep in our hearts that being with somebody is not the definition of being human. It might be a societal standard, but it's not who you are.